Hello and welcome to our demonstration of our CS125 final project app. My name is Akarsh Vankayalapati.
And my name is Daman Mulye.
And our app's name is Sit or Start Fantasy Football, shortened as SOSFantasyFootball, and is an application that compares two current NFL players' stats to determine which player is having a better season and who the user should start in fantasy football. So before we start explaining our app, it's important to talk about what fantasy football actually is. So fantasy football is basically a way for users and players to basically make different lineups on who they think will have the best statistical weeks in fantasy football, in actual the NFL game, and basically go up against different players to basically see who picked the right players for the right week.
Here's the home page of our app. So the way the app works is that the user inputs two players that are currently in the NFL into the text input views, and then they hit submit to see the statistics of both players.
The comparison between any two offensive players, as long as their names are input into the views correctly. As we can see here, if one of the players' names is incorrect, player not found error will appear and prompt the user to put in a different name.
From the main page, the user is shown the next page, which has a tabbed layout of 4 different tabs: passing, rushing, receiving, and prediction. And each tab has statistics that were either taken from the NFL Fantasy Football Web API or calculated by us.
The first 3 tabs are the main offensive statistical categories, while the last tab is basically for the user to determine which player is having a better fantasy football season and who is projected to have a better season in the future or in this week itself.
In each table, the statistics are color-coded to show which player has an advantage in a specific statistical category, with the shade of green showing that the player is leading or tied with the other, and a shade of red shows that a player is behind another.
With the basics of the app out of the way, both Damon and I will walk through and talk about the process of developing the application, while more players are compared to show a larger sample of what the app can accomplish.
We decided to develop this project because we both have an interest for fantasy football and felt that it would be a good idea to program an app that we would actually use for our own entertainment purposes.
And even though the NFL season is coming to an end, because the NFL API updates every week, both of us and any other fantasy football players can use the app for future seasons as well to determine what their lineups should be. For the development of the app, I worked on the initial UI and debugged the back-end software for calculating the stats and calling the API, while Damon did the opposite and worked on the back-end software for calculating the stats and calling the API and debugged them and made improvements on the UI design.
We decided to divide the workload like this because we felt that it would allow both partners to bring new ideas and approaches to the development of the program while correcting the mistakes and making enhancements to the other partner's work. This process allowed for a synergistic partnership between both members to make the best possible application.
Since the data we obtained from the NFL did not have a standard format, we had to come up with a way to generate our UI dynamically to conform to whatever data we received from the NFL. This meant that instead of using XML to generate static layouts for the app, we had to use Java and create the Android widgets manually. This proved to be especially difficult when creating the tab layout, as we did not have to drag and drop system to work with like other apps would.
The other difficulty we encountered was with the initial calls to NFL's API. Since the NFL severely limits the amount a developer can call their API, we had to come up with a persistent storage method to store the NFL players' statistics on the user's phone itself. For each stage of the project, a new branch was made by either Akarsh or I to ensure that our master branch always contained a working build. After we were done implementing our respective features and testing the code we had written, we would then merge our branches into master. This allowed Akarsh and I to work on the project simultaneously without any GitHub hiccups.
And moving aside from GitHub, every day Damon and I would communicate over what progress we made in order to make sure that we were both on the same page and then someone was not working on something that they weren't supposed to or they were going a little too far. In the future, we plan on integrating other fantasy football websites, whether it be Yahoo Sports or ESPN, and have the ability to load fantasy football teams onto the app so it's easier for the players to use when comparing their players on their teams.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed our presentation for Start or Sit Fantasy Football.